All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's online genealogy class, Researching Your Native American Ancestors. So we have a few orders of business to take care of before we get going. There we go. First, we acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people, and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning, deliberations, and public engagement will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect found in our motto, free to all. Secondly, the chat box is open. We do have a few rules, policy, that we want to mention here. So first of all, if you would like to say hi and tell us where you're joining us from, please feel free to. You don't have to, it's up to you. Any chat messages that come in during the presentation and during our Q&A period should be related to the topic of the presentation. And this includes any questions you may have for me, any comments you may have, and any resources you may want to share. It should be related to the presentation. Please, no personal business. Related to that, please be respectful of me and all of the other attendees in the chat box. I will do my best to make sure I get to everyone's questions during our Q&A period. But if I can't get to your question before the program ends, you can please feel free to contact me afterwards. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jessie Wheeler. I'm the genealogy specialist here at the Boston Public Library. I work in the Research Services Department at the Central Library in Copley Square. And just a couple more things. This program is being recorded. I will be sending a link to the recording to everyone who has registered once it is available, which might take a little while. Everyone will be getting a follow-up email from me tomorrow night that will have a link to the handout, to the class slides, and to the chat transcript. So if you miss anything, you don't need to worry about it. You'll be able to catch up to it later. I'm also gonna put a link to the handout in the chat right now in case you didn't get it yet. And let's see, okay, and that is about it. So, here we go. So today we are covering Native American genealogy. We're going to be talking mostly about the issues related to genealogy research. We're going to spend a good chunk of time talking about DNA testing, then we'll go over some resources we have here at the BPL, and we'll talk about some resources available from the US government, and just some other random resources. So this presentation will be focused on resources here at the BPL. If you are joining us from elsewhere, there will still be some things that will be useful for people who live elsewhere. All right, so first of all, there are some issues related to researching Native American genealogy. There are, first of all, and chief of which, there are multiple legal definitions and other definitions. Particularly, different tribes might have their own definitions of what particularly is a Native American or American Indian. I will be using the phrase Native American here just for brevity's sake. The other main issue is there are differing levels of legal recognition of tribes. Not all tribes in the United States are legally recognized, so there's different things that might be happening. Some tribes, like for instance, there are a couple in Massachusetts, might be recognized on the state level, but not on the federal level. So they might be able to receive state assistance, but not federal assistance. Some tribes may not be recognized by any government, whoops, sorry about that. Some tribes may not be recognized by any government entity at all. And there are a lot of tribes in the country who have been working towards trying to get federal recognition for quite some time. It is one of the biggest and one of the issues facing Native Americans in the US today. And related to this federal recognition, state recognition issue is record collections are related to doing this kind of research are going to be scattered all over the place. There'll be different agencies, different locations where things might be kept based on how these things have been handled. Agencies change, responsibilities get moved. So there's that as well. There is, unlike some certain other record collections, for instance, if you're in Massachusetts and looking up birth and death records for certain time periods. It's pretty easy to find stuff online. A lot of these things have not been digitized, the documents that you might need to look at in order to research your native ancestors. And so those are just some of the issues. There is more to that. There's different things like, why are you doing this? Why are you looking into this? Is it just to find out more information? Did you want to get tribal rec join a tribe? And so that also those are also factors in this. A big issue today is with DNA testing, particularly as it relates to Native American culture. And so that is the topic we are going to go into next, DNA testing. There are many, many issues related to this, chief of which is part of it is the home testing kits are generally not advanced enough to give an accurate result. This is true for all types of ethnicities. Not to get too far into the weeds on this, but DNA testing is the matches are based on how big of a pool of people from the same area there is. There tends to not be a lot of Native Americans that have done these DNA tests. They have very valid reasons for not wanting to do this, so there tend to be not really huge pools to compare DNA to. So it's going to be you'll get slightly less accurate results than you would say if you have British ancestry or Irish ancestry or a lot of other things. And this is also true for other ethnic groups that don't tend to want to do this sort of testing. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But the biggest factor with the issue with DNA testing is, to a lot of Native American people, DNA is less important than things like community relationships, the shared experiences and shared culture and traditions. So just because you might have results that you have a certain percentage of Native American ancestry, that doesn't mean that the particular tribe that this might come from would consider you one of them. There are other things that are important there. So it's just something you would need to be sensitive about if you are pursuing this kind of research. So related to that, tribal nations, they have their own criteria for tribal membership. So like I said a bit ago, just because you have some DNA doesn't mean they will let you in or that they consider you as belonging. Genetics could be part of the requirements. It may not be. There might be different types of testing used, but like I said, that DNA is not necessarily going to be part of it. So that's something you would need to contact people who know what the requirements are. Another thing, and this again is true for pretty much all ancestry groups, someone might have a Native American ancestor, like they've found something on a paper trail looking through some of the records we're going to talk about, but have not inherited any DNA from them, or have inherited such a small amount that it does not show up in test results. This is one of the fun things about doing DNA testing. You might have, say you have a grandparent who is 100% German, and they pass down to their child who is your parent. They only got, let's say, 40% of that DNA. And then they might have passed on to you only 10% of that DNA. That doesn't mean that you're only 10% German. That just means you only inherited that much DNA from that grandparent. And I'm really, really simplifying this quite a bit. We have done, in fact, several programs devoted just to doing DNA testing because it is a very complicated issue. But the main point that I'm trying to make here is DNA testing is really only a small part of doing this type of research, particularly with Native American ancestry. So if you're interested in reading more about this, or the ethics and various other things, you'll have a link to these in your handouts. These are some really useful articles that I've read through that talk about the different issues that we've mentioned, and if you're interested in looking into it in more depth. One thing that this was actually recommended to me by someone else, it's no longer in production, unfortunately, but a few years ago, there was a podcast called All My Relations, and one of their episodes was talking about DNA testing. So I highly recommend it. It's only about 30, 40 minutes long, so you can get a lot of really good information, and it is actually done by two Native Americans. So I would highly recommend, particularly this podcast. The link there is to Spotify. You don't have to have an account to listen to it, but you'll probably get random ads if you don't. So these are just a few things that I found if you're interested in learning more in depth about this issue. Okay, so with all that behind us and keeping all that in mind about what kind of pitfalls we need to try to avoid when doing this, we're going to talk about some resources you can use to do this kind of research. So first of all, we do have a couple of books here at the BPL. So let's see. Okay, there we go. So the first one is Tracing Ancestors Among the Five Civilized Tribes. So this Southeastern Indians prior to removal. So this covers people from the five civilized tribes. And if you don't know, the federal government started using the term five civilized tribes to refer to the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole tribes in what was at the time Oklahoma. That's how they referred to them. They called them this because there were large amounts of them had established strong ties with European people of European ancestry. Some of them had assimilated. They had adopted European style clothing, learned English, converted to Christianity, participated in slavery. So they had more of a relationship with people of European ancestry, so they consider them more civilized. And again, this is a 19th century term. This is what was used. So it's important to keep that in mind. So there are different resources for these groups just because they did have such a close relationship with other people. So there's going to be slightly more documentation on them because they've been connected to the federal government for longer than some other tribes. And if you're researching folks in, let's see, it's Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, and Wisconsin, I'm not sure how that got thrown in there. We have another book where this covers some vital records for Native Americans. Some go back as far back as the 1600s, but it is primarily the 18th and 19th century. So there's let's see, the tribes they talk about here are the Oquina, Brothertown, Christiantown. I think these are actually towns. Dartmouth, Deep Bottom, Dudley. I'm sorry, I'm going to probably mispronounce this. Hassanamisco and Herringpo. So that's another thing. If you're researching anyone from those places, this would be a good resource to look at. So as I mentioned before, when talking about the quote unquote civilized tribes, there's a lot of documentation on them. So there's actually quite a bit about the Cherokee in particular. Cherokee, for some reason, is the most common tribe that folks claim descent from. I'm not quite sure why that is, but it is something that comes up a lot. So there actually has been a lot written on this. And there are also, in the colonial era, there were transactions, the buying and selling of land. This started as far back as 1620 when the Mayflower landed in Plymouth. So there are some records there. If you're looking for stuff like that, you can definitely get some information in these books. And we have much more that came from. This is just a small sampling of some of the resources you can take a look at. We have some basic guides to researching Native American genealogy. There are some books just about the Native peoples of the US and various other things. There are even books about DNA. The author is one of the people talking in that podcast I mentioned. So this would be another great resource to look at. She wrote an entire book about it. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, and just various other things that you can take a look at. We also have a section in our genealogy research guide about researching Native American heritage. So this will be more information. We're going to be talking about a lot of these things. And so there's going to be some links that we've already looked at and things you can look at your leisure. And these guides are, this guide is on the internet, so you don't need to log in with a library card. Don't need to live in Massachusetts. Anyone can take a look at this and click on the links. But something we have that you do need to have a card with the Boston Public Library is a database called American Indian Newspapers. This is a database that has a collection of newspapers that were published by Indigenous peoples themselves from the US and Canada. So it also will include publications of First Nations people in Canada. Just take a look at that. If you were to, and this one can be used remotely. So if you did want to click on use that from home, you would type in your library card number and your PIN. So you can go ahead and browse and see what they have. It'll tell you, you can limit it by language. If you are able to read any of these languages, you can look at that. You can browse by location. They have some titles here. So this is really a great resource if you happen to be looking into any of these places or peoples. It would have a lot of really good information and it's from the Native people's perspective. So I think that's something really important to keep in mind. And as I say, I always advocate learning about the history of a place and a time when you're researching someone, just so you can get a better idea of what their lives were like. And this is a great way to do that. Okay, so we're going to spend a good chunk of time on this because most of the resources available are with the federal government. So this is a photograph of the National Archives in the main location in Washington, D.C. If you're ever in D.C., I highly recommend taking a tour. It is free and you get to see some really cool things, and it's a beautiful building. The main thing that the government has are what are called, again, this is the term they used at the time, the Indian census rolls. So these were done for almost every year from 1885 to 1940. So that covers a pretty big span of time. And this is one of the most important resources if you're doing research on this to establish a paper trail. You can find things this way. So, whoops. So the census rolls were produced by government officials that basically they oversaw the reservations that people lived on. So just as with the other US Census, the information that they have is going to vary every year because the questions change, but generally speaking, the more recent it is, the more information there will be. However, the caveat with these are the only people that will be on it will be people that were part of a federally supervised tribe. So that's basically federally recognized tribes, people that had membership. They are the only ones that are going to be included. People who were part of a tribe that wasn't federally supervised or who didn't live on a reservation, they will not be included in these rolls. So a lot of these have been digitized, so we're actually going to go ahead and take a look at the original records here. These are all on the Internet Archive. It's going to take a minute to load here. Okay, no, we're not doing this. Nope. Let's see if we can get rid of that. There we go. Okay, okay, there we go. Okay. So we're just gonna pick one, just gonna click on the first one here. So this is digitized from the microfilm, so the image quality isn't the best. We're just gonna page through here just so you can get a sense of what it looked like. Here we go. Let's see if we can make this a little bigger. There we go. Okay, so this particular this particular set that we've landed on is it says the scattered bands of Potawatomi in Wisconsin and Michigan in 1915. So this was done by the superintendent of that area. Okay. So you can see here, It's fairly similar to what they have for the standard US Census. Is not quite as much information as there would be. So you can see here it will have, and these are the things that can be very useful if you are researching someone who would be in there. It will have their native name in their own language, if they had an English name. It'll have family groupings here. So this one will tell you that this person is the wife of this person, and that's their grandson. They'll have their age and their genders. Like so this one, for instance, doesn't really have much information, but it can be still, the fact that it has two different names, that means you can search by both of them. And fortunately, looks like these folks didn't, their native name isn't included. So, but looks like for the most part, you can search by an English name and a native name. Not everyone, though. So that's success. So like I said, there's not much to it. The other census will have a little bit more information at this time period. They didn't really consider, there's some information that they didn't consider to be that important. So this is what it looks like for this particular area in 1915. And if you did want to learn more about these records, I highly recommend looking at this article from the National Archives. They have the original records. So it'll tell you here what information is available, and so it'll tell you what questions they asked when. So you can say here, see here. Starting in 1930, they started asking about the degree of native blood, their marital status, where they lived, certain other information. So depending on what year you're looking at, it's going to be different. And it looks like they do not have a lot of 1940. So, and this also just give you some background about why they started doing it, who was in charge of it, and again, what's included, and other issues. For instance, apparently there were no instructions about what to do with names. There was very little guidance given this early on. So a lot of the people who were doing the census just kind of wrote down whatever they thought they needed. So that's why the clarity of information, the amount of information can vary widely depending on when and where you're looking at. So I highly recommend looking at this if you plan on using this record set, because it does give you all the information you need to know in order to use that successfully. Okay, so if you don't want to use the digitized set, you have other options. We do actually have this set on microfilm. So if you did want to look at that, you could come to the Central Library in Copley Square here and head up to the Washington room at the Research Services desk to take a look at those. You will need to have a library card with the BPL. You can get at least a research card, and you can do that in borrower services or at the book delivery desk. So that is an option for you if you happen to be in the area. However, if you are unable to, and also if you're joining us from elsewhere, check with your local library or public library or research or university library. Chances are someone will have these. This is a pretty important set, particularly if you're looking at somewhere where there is a large Native American population. They're going to tend to have this set. However, if you happen to be at the BPL or at another library that has Ancestry.com, this has also been digitized. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at this. So again, Ancestry.com is in library use only. And this will also, if you scroll down here, it'll have more information about it. So let's see. So you can also browse here on the right-hand side. So it looks like they have location. They have a location browse. So let's just do New York. So it'll tell you what they have for that time period. So let's click on this one. So it just makes it a little easier to browse through. It's the same set from the National Archives. This is just a different way to look through it. It's slightly easier to browse and try to find someone. Okay, let's see. There we go. Okay. The only irritating part is you have to kind of page through or pick a page number. So this one, let's see, this, like I said, this is the census of the Cayuga of New York from June 1907. So you can see this is handwritten and they didn't write, and this particular person did not write their native name. They only wrote the American name. So, and then it also just says gender and age. So this person, whoever took this information down, apparently didn't feel the need to take any more information. So so you can see it varies pretty widely there. Okay, so if we go back there, so, and if you were looking for, if you do have a specific person that you're looking for, you can also do a search in here. Like I said, you can try searching by their native name or their English name. You might get results from one or the other. You can try doing a keyword search. You can look at a bunch of, you can try a bunch of different factors. You can, if you know what tribe you're looking for, you can type that in. So just for the heck of it, I'm kind of curious. Don't know if they would be in here. So let's try that. No, yeah, I don't think the Massachusetts were part of this. So, okay. Let's see. So let's see. Okay, so let's just, oh, it would help if I could type better. Sorry about that. I got tricky fingers here. Okay. All right, so let's do a search for Cherokee. So yeah, so this one, they are going to be one of the bigger groups represented in here. There's over 72,000 results. You can see we're just looking at a random sampling here. So in this particular record, it tells you actually when this person was born. So let's click on this. So this particular record is from, it looks like, okay, so let's click on this. So, and this is true for anything in Ancestry. If you see a little image thumbnail there, click on it because it will give you more information that is in the transcription. Okay, so this particular one is the Menominee the Kashina Reservation in 1937. It actually, and this one is cool. It tells you the name of the person who took the census, so that's pretty cool. So this is a little later one, like I was telling you, generally speaking, the later it is, the recent it is, the more information there will be. So this has, it looks like it just has, looks like in some places it has their native name and their English name, but not in all. It'll tell you gender. It'll tell you this one included, says their age at their last birthday, and this person actually also included their birth date. So that's pretty cool. Then you can see here it says degree of blood. So this particular group, it says 3/4, which that's how they were determining it. Again, these are people of European descent who work for the US government who are determining it. That's just something to keep in mind. And so this person says F, that would mean full. That's how they were considered. Then it has marital status, relationship to the head of the household. So these are the children of someone who's probably on the last line in the previous page. I'll tell you where they lived. And I guess they didn't fill this part out, and it'll tell you whether or not they were considered a ward of the government, what if they had an allotment, and what the number was. So like I said, so this is a later one, so this does have a little bit more information than the one that we were looking at from 1907 and from 1915. So this is, if you have someone in here, you can get a decent amount of information. Okay, so moving on from those, there's another thing called the Dawes Rolls. Excuse me. So the full name for it is the final rolls of citizens and freedmen of the 5 civilized tribes in the Indian Territory. Also, the Dawes Commission of Final Rolls. So this is another census basically of people who So between these, this was only done from 1898 to 1914, so they didn't do this as much. And this is only the quote unquote 5 civilized tribes. So it was Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole. So you'll notice here it says citizens and freedmen. You can see they started it in 1898. So this also includes some African Americans who had previously been enslaved by Native Americans and then were freed after the end of the Civil War and were considered to be citizens of the tribe or the group. So that's why you see the word freedmen in there. So again, going back to the National Archives, which is a wonderful genealogy resource if you want to learn even more about the Dawes rolls. You can look in here. There's not going to be quite as much as there might be in the census rolls because it doesn't cover everyone and it's a limited time period. But if you want to learn how to use this, what they have, they'll tell you how to use it. So those are just the two main things that folks can use to just kind of research that comes from the government. The National Archives itself has a lot more stuff. So you can click on this and see, it'll go over what they have. So they're mostly going to be they have things like allotment records, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was something that happened during the Great Depression. There was a division just for the Native Americans. Congressional records related to it, the Indian Organization Act. They have photographs. There's some school records, bunch of treaties, tribal rolls. So they have a ton of great stuff. Most of this has not been digitized. So this is something you would need to either contact them and try to get a copy of or visit a location that has it. It even has that note right here. Some things are digitized, but most are not. Most of these records listed here are only still in the original paper records or on microfilm. So if it is on microfilm, you can try doing a search online or you could contact us and we can check to see if it's a set that we might have on microfilm or if another library or other place might have it on microfilm. So this is, like I said, we just talked about a little fraction of what the National Archives has. I always recommend folks check them out for genealogy. They have a lot of stuff. You can also search spot, browse by organization. You can see these are all the different government agencies that have been involved in gathering records on Native Americans over the course of US history. And they also have some different resources on here. So I definitely recommend looking into this, and you might need to visit a National Archives location. So if that's something you can do, I highly recommend that. I love looking through records, going places in person. I don't get to do it as much as I would like to. But if you can do it, I highly recommend it. You can also contact them via email. I think that's down. Yeah, you can get to their contact information on here. So I told you I mentioned photographs. So the photographs are maintained by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So there is a finding aid they have produced. They have over 18,000 photographs, which it is a lot. So let me see if this will load for me today. It's a little finicky sometimes. There we go. So this will show these are not all the photographs they have. This will just show you the digitized ones. So let's say if you want to look by, so we'll say we want to look by topic. Let's say art and artifacts. And then you can browse by state. So let's try New York again. You can see here. So this will tell you, so this will have, so you can look at the photograph. If it would like to come up. It said it's a little finicky sometimes. Okay, this does not want to load for me today. So we'll go back here. So this will tell you who the person is. Sometimes it'll have information. So this one says right here, this person was a descendant of a Seneca chief, what they're doing, and also if it were to load, if it weren't being annoying, and if it were loading for me, it would also tell you when the photo was taken. So if you have a specific person that you think that you're looking for that might be in here, you might be able to find them that way. And it's also, I just love looking through photo archives, even when I'm not looking for something, just to see what there is. Okay. So we did talk briefly about the Civilian Conservation Corps Indian Division. We saw that the National Archive has some records. We're not going to go too deep into this, but if you are interested in learning more about that, if you have a relative that was part of this, this will tell you more information about the program, what they did. You can see here they have some pictures. This is one of the digitized pictures. And it'll tell you what records they have and how you can look them up, if that's something that you're interested in looking at. So that's the federal government. So state governments will tend to also have things too. I'm gonna be looking at specifically Massachusetts. So the state, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts does have a Department on Indian Affairs. So it has the Commission on Indian Affairs. So it tells you who's in the commission. There are only a couple of state recognized tribes in Massachusetts. I believe, yes, it's the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead and Quina on Long Island. Blanking on the other. So this will, okay. And there's a Nipmuc band. So there's different resources. They have links to various resources that you can take a look at. This is specifically for Massachusetts. And what I have found, most states that have a sizable enough population of Native Americans will have a similar office. It may also be called Commission on Indian Affairs or maybe called something else, but most states that have a Native population will have an office like this. So if you're researching someone from somewhere else, you can try just doing some Google searching to see if you can find it, or contact a library out there. That's another tip I love to give in my classes. If you're researching a particular place, contact the library there. If they don't have what you're looking for, someone there will probably know who can help you. Okay. So we're not going to go too deep into these, but I would say these are just some guides about different government resources. So the Department of the Interior, which is what the Bureau of Indian Affairs falls under, has some guides to researching Native American ancestry. There's different other state resources. The Library of Congress, again, I love recommending libraries, also has some information. So this will also tell you more about things that the National Archives has. They'll tell you more about digital collections here. They have some links to audio things and some really cool stuff if you're researching this. All right, so now that we're done with government resources, we're going to talk about some other resources that are out there. So some of these are, there's a lot of different organizations related to Native American heritage and research. So the National Tribal Justice Resource Center does still exist, but for some reason they took down their genealogy page. So this is an archive. This is from the Internet Archive and the Wayback Machine. So like I said, I want to include Native perspectives on this. So this I thought was still good. So because this is an archive page, some of these links may not work, but this can give you a good idea of what they consider to be useful, which I thought was important to include. So there's a couple of other articles here. So Ancestry.com has an article, and this is on the free part of their site. So you don't need to have an account or go through a library subscription to look at this. You can just look at this online. It's part of their free support section. It does not seem to want to load at the moment. It's being a little weird right now. Now. Okay, they've done a few redesigns, so there we go. This will just give you some ideas of how to do it and some different resources you can take a look at. And also from archives.com, there you have another guide. So those of you who aren't familiar, archives.com specifically focuses on resources to research your family history, and they do have a focus on, guidance, and they do tend to link to free resources when they can, and this will also give you some more guidance about different issues. So this is, okay, these are more archived pages. I'm not sure why they took them down, but again, I felt it was important to offer a Native perspective on this type of research. So for instance, we're going to click on the Oklahoma Indian Legal Services. So again, this will just give you more guidance about how this can be tricky, what kind of issues you might encounter, and just some tips on how to do this kind of research. Okay, so I've mentioned a couple times about federal and state recognized tribes. For some reason, the government has made it kind of tricky to find this information. So this is another archived page. This is actually archived by a different organization. So this here is a list of the federal and state recognized tribes. So if we're gonna scroll down here, if I can. I apologize for the image quality. This was the only way I could find this, unfortunately. I'm not sure why. Again, this information seems to be disappearing. I'm not quite sure why that is. So this is an archive. Okay. So Massachusetts, yes, so it's the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead, which is in Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. There are a few other groups of Native Americans that are in the state, but they just don't have recognition. So you can look through here. You can get it. So these are just the ones that have government recognition. And there's a lot more that are out. Okay, so I apologize. So those were federal recognized. So this is state recognized. It's a second list, and you can see here. So Massachusetts also recognizes the Nipmuc Nation. They do not have federal recognition, but they do have state recognition. So again, this is a major issue for a lot of groups of Native Americans all over the country, is trying to get government recognition. So this is just something you can look through, see who does have recognition. But again, this is not an exhaustive list, because this was archived a couple years ago before they took it down. So things have probably changed. The best way you can find current information is, as I said, looking up states, Commission on Indian Affairs or similar department. But again, I always recommend libraries. So this I included just as an example. So the Mashpee Wampanoag do have a page for tribal information about tribal enrollment, if that's something that you are seeking. Most tribes that have presence on the internet, they will have similar things. So the Mashpee Wampanoag have a whole enrollment department. You can see here, this is one thing I had mentioned. So they specifically say, to prove yourself a citizen of this tribe, it is expected that you and your family have and will continue to be involved in the social, political, and cultural well-being of the tribe. So they're not just going to take DNA and let you in. It's not like that. And a lot of tribes, even most of them, probably are very similar. This is just an example of what one of these things looks like. Each tribe is going to be different. So if you're looking to join a particular tribe, look up what their rules are. And I would also recommend contacting a representative and reaching out to them just so they can talk it over with you. This is from the New England Historic Genealogical Society. They have a research guide on Native Nations of New England. This is a free resource. However, you do have to register for a guest account. I'm already logged in from this morning, so I don't have to log in right now. But if you were to look at this without being registered, it would ask you to log in or register for a guest account. So here they have a link to a webinar that they did. This is mainly why I included this. They'll have a table of Native nations in New England. So this is regardless of federal or state recognition. So you can get a good idea of what there is. So they'll have links to their resources and other resources and people that have been important in the history of the area. John Eliot was a big one. For those of you who may be curious, there was a movement in the colonial era that were established praying towns for praying Indians, quote unquote. Those are the terms that they used, that Native peoples who converted to Christianity and lived in these towns and that were supposedly under the protection of the European settlers. Whether or not they converted willingly is up for debate. There's some schools of thought that say they did this just for their own safety. They did not last very long. There actually are still a few cities and towns in New England that started out as praying towns. The main one is Natick. That started out as a praying town. You can just get an idea here of more of the history. Like I said, I always recommend that folks look into the history of the people and places they're researching. Okay. All right. So these I included just because I thought they were interesting. So there's a major effort. Part of one of the other major issues facing Native Americans today is the loss of their language, as there were periods of time where there was things like forced assimilation, where Native children weren't allowed to speak their native language. They had to speak English. So there are a lot of Native languages that have died. So this is one project from the Wampanoag to try to reestablish their native language. So there's a few similar things. That's, again, I just thought this was interesting. So this is something that you can look at if you're interested in looking into that. I also have a couple more guides here. So familysearch.org, if you're looking at a tribe or something that's not in New England, this is a good place to start. Each state has its own section. So again, let's click on New York. So you can see what resources they have, what resources are available. They'll also they'll have a list of native languages and native tribes, tell you the state recognized tribes, the state agencies that have dealt with Native Americans, the types of records each place has. So this is an excellent starting point. And there's also, so this is one of the tribes in Massachusetts. So this is the Wampanoag. We looked at part of their page earlier for enrollment. So this is definitely, they have a history section. So if you want to learn about the history of their people, they have a pretty good brief overview of it. All right, so that is the end of my slides. So we have plenty of time for questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat. And once again, I ask that you keep it to the topic. Okay, let's see. So Paulette is asking, is there a catalog of Native American postcards? I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. I know there's some on Digital Commonwealth. There's the Tickner postcard collection. There might be some things related to Native Americans there, but I'm not aware of any specific catalog for postcards. If you can explain a little more what you're looking for and see what I can find. So Phyllis is asking, how do we research our Canadian Indigenous people? My DNA puts me in a category of North American Indigenous people. So that's going to be different because so what I would say is you there's a few different agencies in Canada that can help out with that. I really only know the US, and that is a little different. Canada, the Native peoples of Canada are different than the Native peoples of the US, so that's going to be a different process. It's, again, an equally bad treatment situation. The Canadian government wasn't any better than the US government with Native peoples, so it's going to be a little different. But I would try, I think the Canada has a national archive, and they have a genealogy section for Native people, so I would check with them. Okay. So Diana's asking a similar question. She's asked, my 8th great grandmother was Abenaki, who married a Frenchman in Quebec. what records are available in Canada. So again, so since you do know what province it was, I believe Quebec, I believe each province has their own archive or library. So I would try contacting them. I'm pretty sure, I know Quebec has one because I've had to look up things for French Canadian ancestry before. So I would try contacting them. They're probably going to have similar records to what's in the US. But again, I know about US records. I'm not 100% sure in Canada, but someone, like I said, I believe they have a provincial library. Not quite sure what they call it, or archive. So do that. Okay, so Paulette is, let's see, so Paulette is saying, I have a postcard of a Native American woman who my family says is a relative. So if you were to look at, so again, there's some of these in Digital Commonwealth. There was a thing that happened where people would take, photographers would come in and take pictures of Native peoples, and they would, they particularly wanted them to be in costume, and they would sell them. So I'm sorry to say, just because you have a postcard, that doesn't necessarily mean you're related to that person. It could be that someone in your family just bought that somewhere. That you might be related to that person, but without, as far as I know, there's no catalog of things like that. You could try the Bureau of Indian Affairs, so they have the catalog of photographs. You could try contacting them to see if they have a copy of that image and see if they might have information about who's in it. As far as I know, there isn't really a place that has just those types of things. Those are pretty common. It was a little exploitive, so there oftentimes might not be any information about who the person was. Just the photographer thought they looked cool or whatever, so they took a picture of them and started selling it. Okay, so Mary is asking, my grandmother came to the US in 1895. Would immigration records reveal her info from Toronto, maybe Mohawk? So that's entirely possible. Uh, if you could find immigration records, those generally will say where they came from, and it should say specifically where they lived. I don't know if it's going to tell you what tribe she was part of. That might be a little trickier. Sometimes they would just use a generic term for Native peoples. But what I would suggest, if she was ever naturalized and became a citizen, that would probably have more information. So if she was naturalized and if you can track down those records, I would say you probably would have better luck with that than immigration records, because I think in the late 19th century, they didn't put a ton of information as to people's backgrounds. Oftentimes they would just it might have what city they lived in, but it might not specifically say any further than that. They would probably just be called Canadian, but you never know. So that's definitely worth tracking down. But my sense is they probably would just say that she was Canadian. Okay. Okay, so Mary. Okay, so thank you, Mary. Okay, so she married an Irishman. You could also see if you can find her marriage. If you don't have a marriage certificate, that might have it. But like I said, that was the 19th century. That was a hard time. They oftentimes would just use generic terminology, so again, they probably would have just said she was Canadian, would be my guess. They might have included her ethnicity, but you're probably, on our end, you're probably not gonna find much. If you can figure out, if you know where she was from, like I said, if she was from Toronto, honestly, I would try the Toronto Public Library to see, they're gonna have a better idea of what records they have for First Nations peoples than I am. Like I said, I don't know much about what's available for Canada. I know the US, but I would try the Toronto Public Library. If they don't have it, they will definitely know who does. So I would check with them. Okay. I don't have anything, so we'll give folks a couple minutes. Okay, so while we're waiting, so if anyone is researching Chinese ancestry, we do have tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. We will have a presentation from Clotilde Yap, who represents My China Roots, which is one of our newer databases that we have. So if you're interested in Chinese ancestry, definitely check that out. I know it's a little earlier than we usually do, but Clotilde is in England. So for her, it's about the same time that we usually go. So that's why it's so early. And our next lecture after that will be in December. We will have a guest speaker from the Leventhal Map Center. There'll be information about that in your follow-up email tomorrow if you're interested in registering for that. And our final class of the fall series will be about looking up obituaries and using them for research. Alrighty, so looks like I just double checking here to make sure I got to everyone. Okay, let's see. Thank you all. You're very nice. Okay, so I appreciate the kind words. So I think so unless anyone has anything else, if you think of something you wanted to ask but didn't get to it, our contact information is right here. You can send an email to ask@bapl.org. You can give us a call Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We'll say there's only one person who answers the phone. So if no one answers, it means she's probably on another call or is taking her lunch break. So please leave a message. I guarantee you, we listen to all the voicemails. Someone will get back to you. We also have a live chat Monday through Friday from 11 to 1. However, I would recommend if you have a detailed question to send us an email. That way we can really take time to look into these. So I want to thank you all. What's that? So I want to thank you all for coming to our presentation tonight, and I hope we will see you at our next sessions, and have a good night and have a good weekend.